Welcome to this edition of Cup Chat with Birding with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Today's special guest, Bill Taddicken from Rowe Sanctuary in Nebraska, joins us to talk about Sandhill Cranes. We hope you enjoy.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We apologize. This took a little while to make it to you. We had some technology difficulties this morning, but this morning on Cup Chat, we have a really fun and exciting topic to share with y'all. It is just me this morning. Emily is in stock show world, and they had a bit of change of plans with the weather, the cold weather rolling in. So I think she had a different morning than she expected to. But I'm Maureen Frank, and joining me this morning from Audubon's Rowe Sanctuary in Nebraska is Bill Taddicken. And he's the director out there, and he's going to share with us today about Sandhill Cranes, which I'm super excited to talk about. One, because I think they're a really neat bird, but two, we are going to start kind of a bucket list series during Cup Chat, where we share with y'all some experiences that we think are just a kind of a birder bucket list type thing. And Bill gets to be right in the center of what I think is one of the coolest birder bucket experiences. So, Bill, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your job and the spring staging of Sandhill Cranes along the Platte River and kind of what that looks like?
Sure, happy to be here. So I am the director at Audubon's Rowe Sanctuary in central Nebraska on the Platte River. I started, you have to always be careful when you get into conservation and NGOs. I started as a temporary in 1997, and now I'm the director and have been for 12 or 13 years now. And yeah, we're right in the middle of America's greatest migration. We have about 1 million sandhill cranes that comes through every spring, and we manage about 2,900 acres, own and manage about 2,900 acres on the Platte to protect for the cranes. And then we also work throughout the whole entire basin, managing the river for wildlife and for birds.
So cool. And how big is Rowe Sanctuary?
Or 2,900 acres ish.
2,900. Sorry. Okay. So that's a lot of area to manage for a lot of birds, but a lot of other stuff as well. Yeah.
We have a lot of grasslands and about 4.5 miles of river. So we have, and about 300 different species of birds that come through Nebraska every year. So a lot of them come right through our area.
That's cool. So tell us about the crane migration and also what it is and also why it happens.
Yeah, sure. So there's about 1 million sandhill cranes in the Central Flyway. They have been spending their winter in Texas and Oklahoma and parts of New Mexico and even into Mexico. They're a lot like humans. They like to go south for the winter and stay nice and warm, although you guys aren't all that warm right now. And so then every spring, about middle of February, something triggers and they start heading north. They're going as far north as Siberia to nest, so they'll have a 5,000 mile plus journey, and then, like I said, sometime in mid-February they start moving north, and they stop on the Platte River because the Platte itself is a nice, median point on a lot of their migration, but it's also provides them for everything they possibly need to build fat. So they have all of the cornfields and waste grain that they feed on. They have wet meadows for invertebrates, and sandhill cranes are omnivores. They'll eat just about anything. About the only thing they don't eat much of is fish. So they'll eat frogs and snakes and baby birds and eggs and insects and everything you can imagine. But while they're in Nebraska, about 80% of their diet is waste grain. And then they spend every night in the river for protection. So they like to stand in about 4 to 6 inches of water. And that provides them basically like a burglar alarm. So if a coyote or something comes splashing out into the river, they can hear them and move away. And then coyotes don't really want to get wet that bad anyway. So they're probably not going to go out there.
And so that's a good description, because I guess you think about like 4 to 6 inches of water, like, that wouldn't deter me as a person if I was trying to go hunt something, but for a predator, it might. And I like what you said of the it's the alarm system. They can hear them coming as opposed to something sneaking up on them.
Yeah, and there's always somebody alert. On Rowe Sanctuary in the middle of March, we could have 150, 200,000 birds on the river on our 5-mile stretch. So, even if 10% of them are awake and got their eyes open, then they're pretty safe.
Yeah.
And then they spend about 3 weeks here to build about 30% of their body weight. So it's kind of like humans between Thanksgiving and Christmas. They're putting on as much fat as they possibly can, because when they get up north to their breeding grounds, it could be 2 or 3 weeks without any food. Everything's frozen solid. So this is a super important place for them.
So it sounds like you're saying that it's not bad to gain weight over Thanksgiving and Christmas. You just have to be prepared to make a 5,000-mile trek afterwards to balance things out.
And then fast for 2 weeks.
And fast for 2 weeks. Okay. Okay.
So that's the reason they're here. They've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. There are fossil evidence of cranes in Nebraska that are about 10 million years old. Those fossils are actually look more like a crowned crane, like they have in Africa now. So, but cranes have been on this planet for probably the longest of all bird species.
That's really cool. And we think about things like alligators, right? Like those have been around. Crocodilians have been around for a long time, and you look at them and they look very prehistoric. And cranes, it's just neat to think about a bird that goes back a long, long time. And cranes, I don't know, I think they look a little bit prehistoric too, but it's just neat to think about how long those species, multiple species, have been around. So
yeah, and the sound of cranes kind of takes you back. It's a very prehistoric sound, and if you just imagine, a Cro-Magnon man standing on the banks of a river listening to those birds, you're hearing the same thing they did, pretty much unchanged over the millennia. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's cool. And we'll hear Sandhill Cranes as they're coming through here. That sound travels so far. I'll hear them, and you can tell that sometimes they might be right overhead, but sometimes you're like, they're way up there and it's like a teeny little speck, but you can hear them. Yeah. But I think it's neat because we talk about actually I guess it was maybe April of 2020, right, kind of at the peak of COVID, on a cup chat we were talking about just how birds connect us across places. And if something's for a species migrating 5,000 miles, it's neat to know we've got these birds here in Texas now. Those same birds, that's what you're going to see. Like, you're going to see the same birds that I've been seeing here, and then they're going to move even farther north from that. So it's kind of cool to think about that spatial connection, but then also what you're talking about, that temporal connection, to know that the cranes that I'm seeing now, look and sound very similar to how they have for a long, long, long time. So
yeah, it kind of adds to that mystique. A single crane voice can be heard for over a mile. So if you put 200,000 of those, and they talk like kindergartners, they never shut up. So if they're all talking at the same time, in the mornings on the river, it is just amazing. Well, even in the evenings, it's surround sound completely.
That's very cool. So if somebody wants to experience this, wants to come to Rowe Sanctuary and experience this, how can they do that? What's that look like?
Well, there's various ways. You can, as a tourist, and you don't want to participate in anything organized, you can drive the river roads between Kearney and Grand Island and see cranes all day long in the cornfields and the wet meadows. They're, as I say, when we have almost 1 million birds here, they're everywhere. And it's the largest gathering of cranes in the entire world. So it's something that happens nowhere else. And you can just drive around and look at cranes during the day. There's a few public viewing areas where you can stop on the river. They get pretty crowded, but you can see some birds coming in to the river at night or leave in the morning on those viewing platforms. But if you wanted something a little more in depth with a guide, you can come to Rowe Sanctuary. We started reservations on January 5th for our 4 viewing blinds. A typical morning, we sneak out in the dark into our blinds. Each one holds about 25 people, and we get out there and not disturb the birds, and they're all kind of sleeping on the river. I've had people say that the morning is like a symphony, and the evening is like a rock concert. So, you're standing there in the dark with all these people that have never seen this before, and looking out of our blinds over the river, and invariably somebody will say, and it's all quiet, and invariably somebody say, I think they're gone. And I just smile to myself and say, just wait. And as it starts to get light, what you think was islands is birds. And everywhere you look, there's birds. And then you'll have a few of them start to wake up and make noise. And eventually, after it gets light, maybe an eagle will fly the river, and it'll put 75,000 cranes up in the air at one time in a big wave. So that's pretty amazing, kind of the crescendo of your symphony. And then in the evening, we go out at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, depending on the time change, before the birds start coming back to the river. And we go into the blinds and we wait until they come back. We spend the time in there until it gets dark, when we can sneak back out. Evening has beautiful sunsets. It's kind of like, I always feel like at certain point in the night, it's always like the Wizard of Oz, when the monkeys are filling the sky from horizon to horizon. Everywhere you look, there's cranes flying and calling and trying to organize, and you'll hear babies, juveniles calling, and it's pretty amazing.
That's kind of a creepy picture now in my head, thinking of them all like coming in at you.
And then we also, if you can't get here, we also have the crane cam. You can go on our website, click on the crane cam. Morning and evening is best, and you can see cranes coming in or leaving. On itsexplore.org is hosting it for us now, but it's been going for almost 25 years. So.
Oh, that's really cool. That's fairly early in the world of webcams, I feel like.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to have National Geographic want to do a crane cam, and they
nice.
set it up for us. And then about 3 years later, they said, we're tired of this. You guys can have the equipment. We muddled through for a long time, and now Explore's doing it, and it's just a really great partnership with Explore.
That's really cool. That's neat. So if somebody comes during crane season, whether they're on a guided tour or not, you mentioned that there's bunches of other species. What else might you see at that time of year? What are other good species to look for?
Well, there's lots and lots of waterfowl. Early in March, we may have several million snow geese on top of all of this, and so like all kinds of waterfowl, everything from cinnamon teal to Canada geese. Harris's sparrows are pretty prevalent. A lot of people want to see them. They're kind of a central United States bird. Woodpeckers, maybe prairie chickens, if you're lucky enough to find a prairie chicken lick. Cool. Sharp-tailed grouse, all kinds of things.
That's cool, because that's a different bucket list thing that I want to talk about in the future, is a prairie chicken lick or a sage grouse lick, because that's a neat experience as well. So that's Absolutely. Pretty cool that y'all have them out there as well.
Absolutely.
That's cool. What about different times of year? What if somebody just happens to be passing through Nebraska in summer or fall, or what are other highlights that y'all have?
So yeah, we're open year round, and the visitor center offers about 4 miles of trails, and so you up and down the river. Everything from red-headed woodpeckers to bobcats, coyotes, just all kinds of great things. Maybe least terns or piping plovers in June and May. Just a lot to see. We do family programs every month. We do lots and lots of education. We have summer camps for kids and things like that. It's our goal to get children wet and dirty and bugs in their teeth kind of thing. It's all experiential learning at Rowe.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
That sounds so good. So thinking about seeing cranes, though, regardless of when you can make it to Rowe Sanctuary, or if you can't make it up to Nebraska, Emily, who's normally on here with me, she hates being cold. And so she is not going to be down for going out to Nebraska in February, March. But are there other places or other times of year across the United States that you can see large groups of cranes?
Yeah, in the fall, Jasper, Pulaski in Indiana is usually good for 10 to 25,000 birds. New Mexico at Bosque del Apache in the winter. Again, it's going to be cooler than what Texas is used to, but Bosque del Apache is really good. 30,000 birds down there all winter. They have a festival typically, although the last couple of years everything's been off. You know, you can see cranes in Texas, not in those big numbers in the wintertime, but you may be competing for the view with hunters. So the cranes are hunted in every state in the Central Flyway except Nebraska. We find them to be a lot more valuable alive than dead. So we're really fortunate about that. Othello, Washington has a festival. Wisconsin, birds nest in Wisconsin. There's nesting birds up by Steamboat Springs, Colorado. So in the Yampa Valley. So there's lots of places you can see cranes.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll kind of put in a plug for the Uvalde Christmas bird count. We usually have maybe 300 to 400. So nowhere near the magnitude of what you get to see, but we normally have a good group, usually just kind of, you know, off in fields. It's not, they're not usually really close, and it's not in those big numbers, you know, for sure, like you're talking about. So something we've talked about on Cup Chat before is the differences of migration, you know, as you're thinking about spring migration versus fall migration. And so I think what you're describing, you know, there's other places that you can see cranes in the fall because they're migrating and they've got these big groups, but it's nothing like that hurry up and get north that you have in the spring, where you just get that biggest group of birds all going through at once. So that's, I mean, y'all are an order of magnitude more than any other place that has big groups of cranes.
Yeah, people think they've seen a large group of cranes at 30,000, and then, you know, you see 200,000, or, you know, for a day you're driving around and see, you know, double that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So also we talked about guided versus not guided experiences at Rowe. Y'all, we have some of our followers who are photographers. Y'all also have a photography experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, we actually have a couple of those. We have one that's for a group of photographers. So we have one blind we can put 10 to 12 photographers in for an evening or a morning viewing. And then we also have an overnight opportunity where you can spend the night with a person that you know very well in a very small blind on the river, and spend the night with the cranes. So that's a great, lots of people love that. Those photography tours, overnight ones, usually sell out the first day we start reservations. So people are on the computer at 9 o'clock in the morning trying to get in. So
what about your regular guided tours? Do those sell out pretty quickly too?
They not typically completely. So right now, I think this last 2 weeks of March are completely full, but there's still space the first week of April, and the first 2 weeks of March, there's still some space. So okay,
that's cool. I didn't realize that one of the photography trips was overnight. That's pretty dedicated, but that would be neat. Is like you say, as you're describing both of those, because this is definitely, for me personally, this is on my bucket list. So as you're describing the morning and the evening, I would definitely come in the morning. And that's kind of what I was thinking coming into this. But as you described that, I was like, wow, the evening's so different that would also be something that I would want to see. So I guess that's the neat thing about doing overnight, is you get to see both.
You get to see both. You know, I always just tell people you should do both, a morning and an evening. If you're coming from any distance, they're both so different, and you know, it's a night and day basically.
Yeah.
But the overnight, is really amazing. It's $250 right now for an overnight blind, and you get to sleep with the birds and whatever other critter comes by at night while you're there. So
that's very cool. That's cool. So a little bit different question, but you get to live somewhere and experience all the time something that's on a lot of people's bucket list. So what is something that's on what's a bird experience that's on your bucket list that you haven't gotten to do yet?
Well, I would love to see some other cranes in the world. So I'd like to see cranes in Mongolia or Africa or other places like that. Yeah, I guess my bucket lists have more to do with places as opposed to birds. So Alaska's on my bucket list, and hopefully this year I'll be able to do that.
That would be cool. That's very cool. Well, you've seen your cranes where you are. You got to find some up north. You got to go visit them in the summer.
Yeah, there you go. I kind of have a competition with one of our supporters that who can see cranes in more states, and she's got me by about 3 states right now, so I got to get going. But every time I see a new one in like Florida or Mississippi, I'll call her and say, "Oh, I got Mississippi." So
that's funny, because last week on Cup Chat we talked about New Year resolutions and how that can look so many different ways depending on what personally somebody wants to set. But also, you think about things like different ways that people keep lists, and here in Texas, people try to be part of the Century Club and see 100 birds in 100 different counties, and so that's kind of a unique thing. But we have a birding buddy who's going to be with us on our spring experience, and she is the founding member of what she calls the Uno Club, where she wants to see at least one species in all of the counties of all 254 counties of Texas. And then that's neat. What you're describing is how many different places can you see the same species. So same species, but you're going to try to get it in all the different states of the US. So that's pretty neat. Or I guess all the states where they occur, right? There's some states where you're not going to find them, but that's really neat.
And one thing I failed to mention is we also have whooping cranes. So whooping cranes also come through for southern Texas. That's not a big deal because you can go down to Aransas and see whoopers whenever, but we have whoopers that come through every spring. And so that can add to your bucket list too when you're here to see sandhills possibly.
Yeah, I think that's still a pretty big deal. And that's a neat thing for people to get to experience, because it's just, there's so few of them that I've only seen one once in my life. And it was kind of unexpected. I was not birding per se when I saw it. But it's definitely not a given thing. Like, yeah, you can go to the Crane Festival and there's times where you're more likely to see them, but knowing that there's just so few, I think that's pretty special still.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's neat. Well, so for anyone who is interested also, we are going to be doing a webinar about cranes next month, March 3rd. And so we've got a couple researchers coming to talk about sandhill cranes and work that's being done on those, and whooping cranes and work that's being done on those. So if you're interested, we'll have that link available here soon to get registered and join us for a little virtual webinar where we learn more about both species of cranes. I think it's neat. It's interesting to me when you look at cranes around the world, and this is something I learned as I was contacting speakers, is that there's 15 species of cranes all around the world, and 11 of those are have populations that are threatened or worse off than that. It's just a lot of them are not in such good shape. And so the fact that we have sandhill cranes here, we have 1 million of them, where we do have, like you mentioned, huntable populations, is pretty crazy in comparison to some of the other species. So
yeah, it's it's a telling thing that lots of cranes depend on wetlands, and that's what's endangered a lot of places is people taking up wetlands for their own uses. So
yeah, wetlands and grasslands. You mentioned, that y'all really have that wetland habitat and that grassland habitat. And I think that's something that people don't realize is just how endangered our grasslands are. When we think about, places around the world in need of conservation, and certainly, the Amazon needs conservation. And there's lots of threats to that ecosystem, but right here, right in our own backyards, right here, in Texas, and as you move up through the Great Plains, Grasslands have been disappearing so rapidly. And so those species, and then especially wetlands, wetland species within the Great Plains, are both just face a lot of threats.
Yeah, the Platte River Valley is a great example of that. 70% of the water is gone before it gets to us now. 90% of the original open channel habitat is gone. 90% of the wet meadows are gone. That's why Audubon's been here since 1970, trying to protect what's left and expand that. Everybody always wants more water, and they're really quick to say, well, you conservationists need to compromise, and we're at a point we're done compromising. We've compromised ourselves to the point where things are failing. And so it's an ongoing effort. We have to manage the river mechanically every year now with heavy machinery to keep the brush from choking it out and keep the trees out. It's if we weren't doing that work in 3 to 5 years, all that habitat would probably be gone.
Did it used to be maintained by flows of water, like it was higher, and so it would keep those woody species down?
Yeah, so the big spring flows and ice jams and everything used to clear out all of the previous year's growth and maintain the river. The Kearney Bridge, the bridge just south of Kearney, Nebraska, in 1916 was 4,385 feet long. I'm sorry, 4,385 feet long. Today it's 800 feet, and it's about 200 feet of water. So that's the difference in the channel that the spring flows used to manage, and now we've contained all that water and we don't get that big flush anymore.
So speaking of conservation, before we started here, you and I had kind of a cool discussion though about a different conservation measure that y'all have at the sanctuary too, which is your building. Can you tell us a little bit about your cool straw building?
Oh, sure. So the Ian Nicholson Audubon Center is built out of straw. It's a post and beam construction. It's local straw from a farmer about 30 miles east of here. And we built it in 2003. At that time, it was the largest straw bale building in the U.S. It's not anymore by a long shot.
What's the largest?
I don't know anymore. They just keep building them. That the building technology of straw bale is a Nebraska invention. There's a building in Nebraska that's over 100 years old, so it does maintain its integrity for a very long time. But the building itself is just so inviting because the temperatures don't change in it much, and our utility bill is about a third of what a normal building that size is in this area. We've made some sacrifices with windows and things like that, so we're not completely as warm as it could be. But the administration wing on that, we had lost power one time in December for 10 days, and I could heat that with just a generator and a single small milk house heater. So pretty conservation efficient. Yeah, that's cool. So kind of tying this back up as far as experiences that people can have, and we're always interested in management and protecting those experiences. If with threats to the river the way they are, what do you kind of recommend if somebody says, well, what can I do to help cranes? Well, supporting Rowe Sanctuary, supporting Audubon would be very important. It's expensive to be able to manage and maintain habitat, and then just also just thinking about how you use water. We think in the United States, we think water is a never-ending supply, but we're getting to the point where we're going to have a lot of crisis over water, I believe. So,
yeah, that's a good point about the costs of management, and that's something that I feel very passionately about. Is because I think sometimes there's this misconception that Audubon has this 2,900 acres, and you protect it by just leaving it alone. And that's not what you do. No. There's not any leaving it alone. And we have this concept that, well, these ecosystems used to be running so well that if we take away the negative impacts, then they'll just be fine running on their own. But so many of our ecosystems have had so much modification already that if we don't restore some sort of functionality by things that we're doing, they're not going to be functioning properly. It's kind of like here in the hill country, there's so much encroachment from juniper that if you just buy a property and leave it alone, it's going to be solid juniper, and that's not a biologically diverse community. And so you've got to remove that and replant native grasses. You've got to do a lot of work to keep that habitat going. So I think that's a good point, is that it doesn't just happen on its own. Y'all are doing a lot of work out there.
Yeah, and over the years, we've removed so many of the tools that nature used to manage this and keep it running smooth. Millions of bison are gone, and topsoil's gone, and grassland cover's gone, and the water's gone. And so, yeah, we have to do something.
Y'all don't have cattle or anything out on the property to graze?
We do have some grazing.
Do you? Okay.
And we have some row crop on the sanctuary.
Okay.
The cranes, we would have to manage our grasslands with grazing and fire and all kinds of different things so that the cranes have a place to go and feed, and to maintain healthy grassland environments for other birds. And then the cranes feed on waste grain. So, we're not opposed to farming. We're not opposed to irrigation. We're just, let's be responsible how we do it all.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Bill. Any other closing thoughts you want to share? I think we ended on a pretty good note.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Conservation friendly. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is truly one of my bucket list items, and I very much hope to come up to Nebraska someday. And now I know I need to do a morning and an evening tour and see all the cranes at once, because that sounds pretty fantastic. So
you're only a short drive away. I've made that trip many times. So.
I know. Just hop in the car and drive. I don't know. It's probably, 16 hours, 17 hours.
Where are you at?
I'm pretty far south. I'm west of San Antonio. So
okay, well, it's a little farther than
a little far. But we'll get there. I will get up there one day. So thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate it.
Thanks.